And we continue at 1:06 in the afternoon, the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
Well, John, as we've been talking about, Gavin Newsom went on Bill Maher's show on HBO on Friday, and you know if Gavin's going to go on HBO, he's going to have to drop some curse words himself.
I deeply respect that. I can't stand the bullshit as well.
Andrew Dice Newsom right there. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. She is a columnist and editorial writer at the San Francisco Chronicle. You can follow her on X at Emily_Hoeven. Emily Hoeven, welcome.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by. So the rest of the country is now talking about a subject that you and I cover on a daily basis here in California, and that is the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who was a guest this week on Bill Maher's program on HBO. And I've got to tell you, I know that Gavin certainly ruffled some feathers within the Democratic Party for comments he made on transgendered athletes participating in women's sports. And that went not just national, but international. That went all over the place. But I've got to tell you, as someone who's been watching this guy for a while, I wasn't very surprised when I saw him say what he said. And I'll tell you why. Gavin Newsom has had a history of making these big, grandiose proclamations and then having no follow-through. You go back when he was mayor of San Francisco and he's giving that PowerPoint presentation with the Pat Riley hair, and he's talking about how homelessness is going to be solved in 10 years or whatever it was. And, of course, that came and went. That didn't happen. During the recall election, he made all of these promises about reparations, and he said that reparations would be the law of the land in California. And then that turned into, well, we're going to study it. And then that turned into, well, we'll increase government spending and we'll call that reparations. And what he did with the transgendered athlete statement is kind of similar to that. He made that statement, made that declaration, but there's no evidence that he signed any kind of legislation that would do that or has plans on signing legislation that would do that. It's just a statement where maybe there will be follow-through, but probably there won't be. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how far he wants to take that statement. Actually, tomorrow in the state legislature, there is an assembly hearing that is actually on several bills that would ban transgender athletes from female sports. And so, you know, I doubt that those bills will make it through the legislature, just with the supermajority Democrats kind of controlling that. I don't think the bills are going to have a lot of traction. You know, the governor rarely intervenes in legislation before it reaches his desk, but he has done that so far already. This year, there was a bill that was going to further limit how much local law enforcement can cooperate with immigration and customs enforcement, and he basically said, you know, no, don't even send that to me because I'm going to veto it, and I, you know, want to ensure that, you know, local law enforcement in jails and prisons under certain circumstances can cooperate with the federal government. So he is, I think, kind of trying to take this more moderate approach. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, you know, his comment didn't surprise you, because there was actually a talk the governor gave in Sacramento, I want to say it was maybe a year and a half ago, where this issue came up, and he also sort of gave a kind of a middle of the road response that I think was surprising to even some of his supporters, where, you know, he has some daughters who, you know, compete in sports. And I think he was basically saying, like, you know, it's a tough one. And so he hasn't been, you know, nearly as outspoken on this issue, I would say, as he has been on things like gay marriage, which he kind of became, you know, internationally known for supporting back when it was not popular to do so. But yeah, whether it will come to him actually supporting some type of legislation, I think that would be a much more stark sort of move than he's been willing to make thus far.
If Gavin Newsom is done with California and he can't run for re-election, he's barred by voter-imposed term limits from doing that. A U.S. Senate seat is not open in California, probably won't be for some time. It's basically president or bust for him at this point if he wants to remain in elected office. Given that reality, he is clearly trying to tailor his politics and his appeal to people in places like Pennsylvania and Arizona and Nevada and Michigan and all of those purple states that will ultimately decide the next presidential election. Well, it makes sense for him to do that if that's the race that he's going to jump in. However, if you're trying to appeal to the median voter in Arizona and you're expecting to keep the Democratic members of the California state legislature happy, you're probably got another thing coming. What kind of relationship do you think he's going to have with the legislature these last 2 years if he tries to moderate his persona and his positions to the point to where he could win an election in a state like Arizona?
I'm not sure that he'll ever really be able to reconcile those two things, quite honestly. I mean, I think even if he were to, significantly moderate his approach on a lot of different issues, in my personal opinion, I have a hard time seeing, voters in some purple states, let alone red states, really buying the legitimacy of that change in tune and tone. I think that we saw that in the last presidential election when you had the vice president, Kamala Harris, sort of walking back some of her previous stances on a variety of issues. And, I don't think that moderate voters really bought that. And even when she had, former Republicans or Republicans coming out and supporting her, again, they didn't really think that was a legitimate change in approach. And so, I think what's interesting is that the governor, now that he's sort of a lame duck governor, I think you might see the legislature be willing to be slightly more aggressive in how they take him on, how they respond to some of his decisions. There was an interesting sort of analysis that found that the lawmakers have not, in I think decades, used their power to overturn a gubernatorial veto, which they could do with a 2/3 vote in both houses. And so, if the governor were to, let's say, veto a bill that was really popular among the Democrats, conceivably they have the votes to overturn that veto. They've chosen not to do that in the past. I mean, largely because, you don't want to make the governor mad when you're going to have to, need his support for you to get your priorities through. But if he's on his way out the door and he's taking stances that are increasingly unpopular among Democrats in California and elsewhere, I think you might see them sort of start to pursue avenues that they maybe have not pursued for a long time. Because I think there's this really interesting tension where you're seeing Democrats in California and some other states actually beg Democratic leaders to be more aggressive in how they take on the Republican Party and the Trump administration. And actually the governor has done sort of the opposite of that. And so, there's only so much he can do before he will face like real backlash among legislators here and even his constituents here as well.
How do you think these last 2 years he's going to handle other California Democrats who he regards as generating negative attention that hurts him politically? We've seen how he's handled that in the past, where here in Los Angeles County, we know that he is not fond of our public health director, Barbara Ferrer, and he complains about her privately to people at the county, but he won't say anything negative about her in public. He wants to make it look like it's one big happy family. We know that he's been frustrated or was frustrated when Sheng Tao was mayor of Oakland up in the Bay Area, and he's complained about her to a lot of different people, but he would never overtly criticize her publicly. Same thing with the DA up there, Pamela Price. However, now that he's a lame duck and he doesn't have to worry about making sure all of these people and their social networks get behind him in his various elections and re-elections, he's free to openly say whatever he wants about anyone here in politics in the state of California. And one person who is certainly attracting a lot of negative attention right now is the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass. And when Gavin comes down here, he has recently been spending most of his time in Altadena, which is not in the city of Los Angeles, as opposed to the Pacific Palisades, which is in the city of Los Angeles, because I don't think he wants to be photographed with Karen Bass. He's said things, well, to the effect of, well, don't blame me for problems in Los Angeles because many of those issues are at the city level. They're not at the state level. So I'm not the mayor of California. He's used that phrase many times over and over and over again. How do you think these last 2 years he's going to handle those people who he believes are hurting his image?
It's interesting. I mean, I don't think that he would, come out and oppose Karen Bass or, support the recall effort against her that's underway right now. I mean, I think in the long run, he does want those places to succeed because at the end of the day, like how California looks now and in a couple of years is going to be the legacy that, defines him for honestly the rest of his life and his political career. And I think that oftentimes he's sort of preferred to, as you said, kind of make comments or things behind the scenes or have his administration influence policies in different ways. But he has also been willing to be pretty aggressive against cities and counties that he views as obstructing progress on various things, whether it's housing and homelessness. I mean, he's multiple times threatened and, withheld money from jurisdictions that he felt, weren't doing their part in addressing the homelessness crisis. And, even with the former mayor of Oakland and the former district attorney of Alameda County, he was pretty aggressive in holding press conferences and saying, look, like you guys have a kind of a crazy policy that limits when police can initiate chases against suspects. You need to change that if you want the California Highway Patrol to continue helping out your local law enforcement. So, he might get more willing to call people out by name as time goes on. And I think also, he's sort of developing his own platform, like with the podcast that he has, where he can kind of, say things and have a different conversational tone than he might have in his official capacity.
We're speaking with Emily Hoeven of the San Francisco Chronicle. You can follow her on X at Emily_Hoeven. Emily, right now the state of California is facing a crisis when it comes to insurance. And this is something that is not new, although with the fires and everything that we've been going through recently, it's certainly top of mind. What the governor and the state legislature have done in the past when they've been dealing with this is they essentially punt the issue to the insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, and they have designated him as the point man to deal with the crisis. Since then, he's been involved in scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal, most recently with ABC7 up in the Bay Area, finding out that he's been spending a lot of time on the road and not a lot of time at oversight committee hearings in Sacramento in front of the state legislature. Do you think that this position of just making Ricardo Lara the person who's in charge of fixing this is going to be Gavin's long-term position on the issue, or do you think he's going to have to become a lot more aggressive?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I honestly think that a lot of people in Sacramento like to approach these issues as a way where, that's not my direct purview. And it was interesting because even when the insurance commissioner, I think now it must have been a couple of years ago, put out this blueprint for basically overhauling a lot of the state's insurance policies, he did so after the legislature kind of punted on the issue and was like, well, maybe we should have him weigh in. Then the governor put out an executive order that was really just saying, yes, I would encourage the insurance commissioner to sort of take these actions. And I think what we're seeing now, definitely Lara has had some PR issues, and I think there's a lot of things that he could have been more transparent about or, handled a bit more judiciously, even in responding to those requests about his travels. But I do think that the general framework that he has shepherded and put in place in regard to, changing the types of things that insurance companies can do when they're determining rates, and also requiring, more coverage in these fire-prone areas, to kind of ensure that they're not just picking the most lucrative and favorable policyholders to insure. I do think that framework, by and large, I've done a fair amount of reporting now on this, and a lot of the folks that I talk to do think that this is sort of the best path available. And now we're in the stages where a lot of those big things have been implemented, and now they're kind of just working on the smaller details. And, there's no question that this is going to continue to be an issue, but I do think that PR issues aside, which are definitely part of this, I do think that the insurance commissioner has put in place a good framework, and now it will really depend on how the department implements it, how the insurance companies sort of respond and, file their rate requests as these things go forward. And then I think from there will be fixes and adaptations that the governor and the legislature might work on. There are a couple of interesting bills that lawmakers have put forward on this issue, including allowing the FARA plan, which is the state's insurer of last resort, to basically access certain types of state-backed bonds in case it goes insolvent, as has already happened this year. It requested a $1 billion bailout from the private insurers that back it. And so I think that, I think that framework is good. There's going to be some legislative fixes. The insurance commissioner is sponsoring some of those bills himself. So I don't foresee the governor having to get a lot more involved in this in the next couple of years, unless something goes, catastrophically wrong and somehow the framework falls apart or doesn't work the way that, people are sort of anticipating it to work.
Let's go back to the podcast for a second, because Gavin, I think, got the idea to do this podcast because during the last campaign, Donald Trump was very aggressive at going on all the various podcasts, including Joe Rogan, Theo Von, The Undertaker, and that helped him win votes among young males who listen to those podcasts. And he went on those shows, and his message got disseminated all through those social networks associated with each one of those programs. What Gavin's doing is a little bit different, though, because instead of going on other podcasts where he's exposing himself to other social networks and other audiences, he's trying to create his own thing where he creates his own silo, his own social network, where people come to him for information and news about him. How do you think that's going to work compared to how Trump did it? Because the way I look at it, Trump spoke to a larger audience of people who would otherwise maybe not even be paying attention to him. It seems like Newsom's going in a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's somewhat attempting to replicate that by having on people that are going to cause a lot of stir. I mean, his first guest was Charlie Kirk, who has his own show and is very popular among a lot of those people. And so that sort of cross-pollinated with Charlie Kirk's network, Steve Bannon, some of the other people he's had on. I do think there will be a test as to how long this can stand the test of time, especially as the governor gets closer to exiting office. Will he still have the same cachet and interest as he did when he was in office? What types of guests will he have on? What will he really do or talk about? I think some of the original they're the initial episodes where they're kind of just having a quote unquote debate, which is like more so Newsom's having his guests kind of talk about various things and Newsom kind of nods along. I don't know how long that's going to sort of captivate people's attention. The interesting thing is, Trump or some of the other people that have gone on these podcasts, they're kind of putting forth their own worldview. And I feel like so far, the governor has more so just like been listening to other people's worldview and offering like commentary here and there. So I don't really know that it's revealing anything about him to other people that they wouldn't know already. And apart from that, I do think that I recently wrote a column about this, that the governor's entire setup of this podcast as sort of a business venture raises ethical questions, because he, has contract deals with iHeartMedia, which is producing these two podcasts. And it's sort of unclear what the terms of those deals are. Is there future income that's going to come from it that could affect how he weighs in on issues affecting iHeart while he's in office? Where is this podcast being taped? How are these guests being chosen? How much time is this taking from his day job? I mean, he also has another podcast with iHeart. So those are some of the things that I think are very pertinent for viewers to consider, because, he's an elected official running one of the largest states in the country. But he's also taking this time for a separate venture that, could be sort of priming the pump for him to have a larger podcast empire in the future.
Emily Hoeven, columnist and editorial writer at the San Francisco Chronicle. Thank you so much for stopping by. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, John, for having me. Appreciate it.
And Randy, we have an update for you on a story we did last week involving conjugal visits.
This is at a prison in Amador County where over the last year, 2 different women were strangled to death in the conjugal apartment.
That's what they call the apartment?
And they call it a family living space where apparently you and your wife or you and your wife and your children can live in an apartment unsupervised for like 2 or 3 days.
I can only imagine how this apartment is decorated.
For an update on exactly how...
Now, wait a minute. Do we know if they have a heart-shaped waterbed or a mirror on the ceiling?
I would certainly hope not. For more on this wild story out of Amador County, here is KCRA 3 in Sacramento.
We requested the coroner's report to find out how this could have happened. How was Tanya Thomas murdered on the prison's watch? What we got reveals the...
Come on. I understand that you have to sell the sizzle, not the steak. But a woman visiting someone in prison for being a violent predator gets murdered is not exactly a shocking story.
What we got reveals the last time a correctional officer actually laid eyes on her before she was found dead on July 1st.
It's sweeps week, Johnny.
By the way, I don't blame the guards one bit. If she is in there to have intimate relations with a convicted killer, do you want to be the one who walks in on that? I wouldn't.
It was supposed to be the last day of a 4-day conjugal visit at Mule.
4-day conjugal visit?
My God.
What exactly are the amenities that we are offering our most violent criminals?
We know that they sneak cell phones into the prison. Are they sneaking Viagra too?
You get to live in the conjugal apartment for 4 days?
How many hours is that?
Well, if it's 24, 48, 7, 84 hours. No, it's more than that. 96 hours.
96 hours. 96 hours for a conjugal visit. Is that with the same woman, or can you switch them out?
Is 95 hours cruel and unusual punishment? Who exactly decided at CDCR that this is a policy that makes any sense whatsoever?
I think even under the best of circumstances, it's cruel and unusual punishment for the woman.
We always understood that a conjugal visit meant that there was a trailer out back and you got 30 minutes.
I thought it was just in a conference room.
It was supposed to be the last day of a 4-day conjugal visit at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, but 47-year-old Tanya Thomas never returned to her San Francisco home. After Thomas's murder in July came 62-year-old Stephanie Dowell's murder in November, just 4 months later.
No.
Both of them strangled to death in that conjugal apartment by different killers.
How many women are willing to have conjugal visits with these criminals?
More than you would think.
Okay, if you are the criminal, even if you're wired that way, why would you kill someone who's willing to come up there and have a conjugal visit with you? I don't think the line is wrapping around the building.
Well, the people who are serving hard time for violent crime aren't known for their critical thinking.
Yeah, that's true. Their judgment isn't the best.
No, it's nothing I've ever seen before. It's been unprecedented in my experience.
I mean, what if she started talking about the other prison pen pal she had?
Maybe that's what happened.
No, it's nothing I've ever seen before. It's been unprecedented in my experience since I've lived in the county.
All 30 years, most of which Todd Reeby has spent as Amador County's district attorney.
We haven't had certainly a homicide, even a violent crime to my knowledge.
And now we've had 2 in the span of 6 months.
Different men.
And different victims.
Well, of course.
That has occurred during the family visits.
Thomas was the mother of a...
Why is a family visit to a prison 4 days?
That policy has to be revisited.
And 4 days where you're not supervised by the guards?
Although, if you've decided that you're going to kill the person, if it's 4 days or 4 hours, my guess is if you're alone in the room with them, it's going to happen.
Family visits.
Thomas was the mother of a 25-year-old son. The father was 48-year-old Anthony Deshawn Curry, the inmate she was visiting. He's been in prison for the last 17 years, serving a life sentence for attempted murder plus 13 years for carjacking.
And that's her groom.
Fun fact, do you know that death row inmates don't get conjugal visits?
They don't.
Yes.
What about all those women who want to marry Scott Peterson?
They are going to have to write some very descriptive letters, but there's no trailer for them.
Take a creative writing class, ladies.
The couple had been staying in a 2-bedroom apartment-like facility, according to the coroner report KCRA3 Investigates obtained.
Why does this prison have a 2-bedroom apartment for hooking up?
And we're paying for it.
It also reveals more than 10 hours went by from the time a correctional officer last saw Thomas alive to the time she was found dead.
She was seen at 8 p.m. on June 30th when she was escorted to the visitation office to take her nightly medication.
The story is getting weirder and weirder.
Wait, so if you're a guest at the prison, you have to be supervised before you take your medication?
Well, they want to probably make sure that she's not bringing anything for the boyfriend.
I guess.
They don't want, she can be, if apparently she's staying there for 4 days. She needs her own medication, but they don't want her smuggling anything to him that then he can keister out back to his cell. And yes, I use keister as a verb.
I noticed that.
Then at 6:30 the next morning, Curry activated the intercom system.
Mr. Curry had
What? They got a butler button at the inmate 2-bedroom apartment for loving?
Can you imagine if you are the contractor who got the contract to build this prison and they say, okay, we need the cells, we need the administrative office space, we need the yard, and then, of course, we need the conjugal visit apartments, and make sure that you put an intercom system in there, too.
Mr. Curry had contacted authorities that his wife needed attention.
The report shows Curry claimed Thomas was having a medical emergency, later telling investigators he woke up and noticed blood coming from her nose.
Sure.
And he expected them to believe this?
When an investigator asked about her eye, Curry said he inadvertently poked her in the eye while sleeping.
What?
What happened to your girlfriend there, sir? Well, her head fell off. Oh, is that so? Yeah, natural causes. She was getting pretty old.
But his story didn't line up with what the coroner found.
The cause of death for Miss Thomas was strangulation.
The same cause of death found in Dowell's case, too.
We're dealing with 2 murders on the prison grounds. Do you think something needs to change moving forward?
Boy, this music is getting really powerful.
Well, I mean, how much news do they have in Amador County?
That's true.
I would hope that there would be a thorough review.
This is a wild break from the new Zinfandel crop is looking a little dry this year.
I've been to the Amador County Fair before, and let me tell you, outside of the corn dogs, I don't know what you can put on the front page of the paper.
Would be a thorough review of the eligibility criteria for the inmates that get to participate in these family visits.
Why do we have this at all?
Okay, if you do a background check on all of these inmates, which ones are going to come across as being good people?
I would also hope that they take a look and review their safety procedures and protocols to ensure that those who visit the prison are safe.
How about you don't get a 4-day stay over with the 5th night free if you use your Hilton Honors?
Well, or how about this? If you are willing to roll the dice on a 4-night conjugal visit with a convicted criminal, you take your chances.
The Corrections Department manual shows inmates have to present themselves for account at least 4 times in a 24-hour period. But it doesn't mention any checks on their visitors.
So the guard goes up to the room and says, the inmate answers the door. Everything going okay? How's the wife? She's fine? Okay, I'll check back later.
See you in the morning.
We also know there are not any eligibility requirements that prevent inmates convicted of violent crimes, even multiple murders, for example.
The guy who murdered the 60-year-old woman, he has been convicted of like 4 or 5 murders.
And she knew this and drove to the prison for a conjugal visit anyway.
For example.
That prison loving must be some good loving.
I guess.
For example, from getting those conjugal visits. But CDCR has now temporarily canceled those visits in high security areas at Mule Creek and at other prisons. They say they put those restrictions in place about 3 weeks ago because of a, quote, surge in violence against staff and inmates.
No conjugals for you. You weren't on good behavior.
But I thought the conjugals were supposed to allow them to blow off steam so they wouldn't attack each other or the guards.
Turns out they blow off steam in a different way. Sometimes if your compulsion is killing, you need to kill.
That's what we're finding out.
No mention of violence against visitors. Back to you.
So far, no one has been charged in that second murder, but the CDCR says it is still investigating.
Isn't it obvious?
Yeah, you don't need Matlock to figure that one out.
If you're locked in a conjugal trailer with a convicted murderer and you get murdered, I don't think it really takes too much calculation to figure out what happened there.
Here's the screwed up part of this story. Not only are you paying for this apartment, this love nest, so the inmates can have conjugal visits with their various girlfriends, but when one of the girlfriends gets killed by one of the inmates, we're going to be on the hook for the lawsuit too. Because you just watch. The family members of these women are going to say, oh, my God, she was under the impression that he was a fine, upstanding gentleman. And then she goes to the prison, and because the guards don't check on them enough, she was murdered by this guy who turned out to be a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde after all. That's what's going to happen. And they're going to settle. And these family members are going to get a pile of money that's going to come out of all of our pockets. Ridiculous. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Sylvia in Venice writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. Johnny, maybe she got killed because she didn't bring in drugs to this guy. In either case, women should really think about hooking up with a prison person. Like you said, when you roll the dice, you're taking a chance.
And sometimes you roll a 7. And Randy, now that we've crossed the halfway point of today's show, if you want to continue listening to us after we sign off, that's easy to do.
All you got to do is search for The John Phillips Show wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Spotify. Search for The John Phillips Show. Hit subscribe. You can download all the episodes. Why don't you listen to that episode last week where in a typical interview with Professor Barbara Stone, she went off the rails.
Because those people are socialist back crazy.
And starting tomorrow, we're going live in the Bay Area.
Tomorrow, April 1st, The John Phillips Show will be broadcasting live and statewide every single day from noon to 3 on 790 KABC in Southern California and 810 KSFO in the Bay Area. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your prison conjugal visit buddies that you can listen to us live every single day on 790 KABC and 810 KSFO. Also streaming live at KABC.com and KSFO.com. We're so excited to be doing this live every single day from noon to 3 starting tomorrow.
I don't know if you've seen many of these videos, Randy, of people getting caught vandalizing Teslas. But the arc of each one of the videos is exactly the same.
Oh, yeah?
I wasn't vandalizing a Tesla. You must have me confused with someone else. Oh, really? Would you like to see the video of you vandalizing the Tesla? Oh, yes, that does appear to be me. It was a crayon that washes right off. It wasn't a key. Well, let's zoom right in and see what you were vandalizing the car with. Oh, look at that. It's a key. Well, it should wash right off or buff right out. I didn't really mean to. I'm not mad at you. I'm just mad at Elon Musk, so I decided to take it out on you. I'm sure you understand. And these people, I guess, depending on where they do it, they're looking at a lot of time in prison for doing that. And I don't think the thought ever crossed their mind that they could end up going to jail for a long time for doing that. But I, for one, will enjoy it. Every single one of these videos, all the people doing it, I wish we could have MSNBC lockup follow them around with cameras. Because they're in for a rude awakening.